Okay. Good evening and welcome to Our Children Matter, empowering our families on race, civil liberties, and law enforcement. My name is Melissa Desravines and I am the Eastern Regional Treasurer. I bring greetings on behalf of the entire Regional Executive Board led by our dynamic Regional Director, Melinda Alexis Hayes. I am excited to be on tonight's forum with you as we hear from esteemed panelists who will tackle timely and relevant information, as well as provide us with the tools to prepare our children to be safe in today's environment. At this time, I would like to both thank and recognize all of our co-sponsors who made tonight possible. Starting with Jack and Jill of America Incorporated Eastern Region. Thank you to Alpha Phi Alpha, Fraternity Incorporated Eastern Region. Thank you to Moms of Black Boys United. And thank you to Mocha Moms Incorporated, New Jersey. Now, I would like to turn it over to our Regional Fathers Auxiliary Chair, Sherlock Dow, who will introduce the topic of tonight's forum. Sherlock?
Thank you. As Fannie Lou Hamer once said, we are sick and tired of being sick and tired. This really sums up how we in the Black community feel. These last few months have been heart-wrenchingly and tumultuous, following the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and Breonna Taylor. The nation and even the world erupted because we were devastated that Black people could be so callously slaughtered like animals in the streets. As we watched and heard George Floyd's cry for mercy under the crushing weight of a police officer's knee on his neck for nearly 9 agonizing minutes, our hearts were incredibly heavy, and we could not help but think of our children. How do we empower them so they know what to do if they're stopped by the police? How do we protect their rights? These killings are a stark reminder that we must be ever vigilant in protecting all African-American children and teens. We cannot stand by, nor can we be silent in these turbulent times, because our families matter. Instead, we will rise up, we will stand up, we will speak up so that one day we can all say, never again.
As teens, many of us are struggling with how to process these recent events and the racial unrest that has so visibly spread to every corner of our nation. The recent killings have been difficult to process because many of us grew up in the era of President Barack Obama. So we believed our country had made significant strides to end racial disparities. The brutality directed at Black people by those sworn to protect them and the subsequent delay in justice for their killings has underscored the fact that we still have ways to go to fulfill the promise of our nation. Many of us go to school, sit in classrooms, or live in neighborhoods where those around us don't look like us. We accepted these conditions and formed friendships with those from different races, many of whom are our close friends. After the murder of George Floyd and hearing the rally calls of the Black Lives Matter movement, we all wanted to march in the streets, organize petitions, and stand in protest, and demand the changes we falsely believed our nation had already achieved. As teens, we realized in order for issues such as systemic racism, racial profiling, and police brutality to end, we must add our voices to demand change. We are the ones who will run for office and hold our leaders accountable. We are the future. Roll video.
My face turned to the sun. Well, I got eyes in the back of my head, just in case I have to run. Do what I can when I can, while I can for my people. While the clouds roll back and the stars fill the night, that's what I'll stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on. I can feel it in my bones, and I know what's around the bend might be hard to face, 'cause I'm alone, and I just might fail, but Lord knows I tried. Sure as stars fill up the sky, stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. You hear freedom calling, calling me to answer. Keeping on, I can feel it in my bones. I go to prepare a place for you. I go to prepare a place for you. I go to prepare a place for you. I go to prepare a place for you.
Baltimore native David Miller has received international acclaim for Dare to be King, What If the Prince Lives? A survival workbook for African-American males. A thought-provoking, year-long curriculum teaching adolescent males how to survive and thrive in toxic environments. David has provided extensive training for juvenile justice, youth development, and mentoring organizations in the US and abroad. He also collaborated with the SALT Project on a short video titled Get Home Safely, 10 Rules for Survival If Stopped by the Police. The groundbreaking video outlined steps for navigating police encounters and was also nominated for an Emmy and featured by hundreds of media outlets. He has a bachelor's degree from the University of Baltimore and a master's degree from Goucher College. Ladies and gentlemen, David Miller.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. We are super excited to be hosting 5 heartfelt, dynamic presentations this evening that really will strike at your core, addressing policing, police brutality, and other salient issues that impact young folks and adults in our community. Our first presentation will be by Mondi Kumbala Frazier. And so, ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts because it's on and popping.
Good evening. My name is Mondi Kumbula Fraser, and I am the immediate past Eastern Regional Director for Jack and Jill of America. In addition, I serve as the director of the Black and Brown Coalition for Educational Equity and Excellence. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the Black Lives Matter movement. As many of us remember, in 2013, it was a very difficult time for our nation because that marked the death in July of that year of Trayvon Martin, who was just 17 years old and who was shot and killed by George Zimmerman. Trayvon Martin was actually returning from a convenience store where he had purchased an iced tea and a pack of Skittles. But one of the neighborhood people thought that he looked, quote unquote, suspicious and called for someone to, for one of the night watchmen to come and take a look. and they had an altercation. It was devastating for many of us, and I have 2 boys. So when you see Trayvon Martin, you can't help but think that that could be one of our children at some point as well. And the movement grew in 2014 because then we had the brutal deaths of Eric Garner in New York City and also Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. The movement has actually grown this past year when we had the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery and also Breonna Taylor, and most recently, George Floyd. I think all of us can remember where we were when we first saw that chilling video, and the fact that we saw a white police officer kneel on his neck for 9 minutes while he was pleading for mercy. The police officers in this case have been charged, but often that does not happen. And as a result, the nation has erupted in racial unrest, and we've had protests from coast to coast. I know many of us have taken our children to those protests because their hearts are heavy, and we wanted to have this opportunity to talk to them about how to move forward and how to have a plan, an action plan moving forward. Next slide. So the expansion of the Black Lives Matter movement, I think, has been especially poignant at this time because when you think about it, Mr. Arbery was jogging in his neighborhood. Mr. Floyd was out picking up takeout, which many of us do. Ms. Taylor was asleep in her home. So we can relate to the fact that you have normal people engaging in everyday activities that should not end in tragedy. But sometimes for African Americans, that's what has exactly happened. As a result, we've had companies, large companies such as Amazon, Apple, Microsoft have pledged in order to support initiatives that support racial equity. And they've become a lot more involved in these issues. We have schools across the country, even schools that are not predominantly minority schools, who are adding racial equity to the curriculum so they can try to find ways to connect to the students. In workplaces, many people receive calls from those who said that they wanted to serve as allies, those of other races who wanted to come and join the movement because they realize it's not just about Blacks, it's about all of us, it's about humanity. Next slide. So I wanted to share some data on police brutality and racial profiling and accountability. So as many of us know, the police are more likely to stop and search Black and Latino drivers on the basis of having less evidence than they use in stopping white drivers who may be searched less often. When you look across states, contraband has shown to be in 36% of searches for whites as compared to 32% for Black drivers and 26% for Latino drivers, yet we are stopped at a disproportionate rate. 28% of people killed by the police since 2013 are actually African American, even though we only make up 13% of the population. And it's devastating to have the reality that Blacks are 3 times more likely to be killed by police officers. Next slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of racial identity for children, because many of our children are kind of struggling in the sense that they have come from the era of Obama. As President Jocelyn mentioned earlier, they've grown up with a Black president, and then now to see some of these things happening reminds them that we are not a color-free or post-racial society as we would like to be. So I think it's really important for us to make a conscious effort to acknowledge the fact that our children do have a different skin color, because I have been in teen programs where I've heard teens say that they try not to stand out because they don't want to be different. Maybe even laughing sometimes when they hear people making racist jokes. They sit so that they can avoid crying, and hoping that they won't stand out. So we have to make sure that they feel strong, that they have a strong cultural identity, cultural education, strong racial identity. There are programs and movies, Black characters that really have our children really focus on who they are. And look at books like, James Baldwin, Malcolm X, and you have others featuring Black protagonists and Black lead characters, and books also written by Black authors. Even though we want them to assimilate and be able to get around along with people of other cultures, if we try to minimize the fact that there are differences in races, it actually kind of hurts their self-esteem. So there are lots of also educational exercises that I would recommend as well. There are some that talk about the importance of privilege and that there are certain exercises that show, depending on where you were born and who you were born to, and the level of education for your children, and the level of education for parents, it can make a stark difference as to where you end up in life. Another thing that's really important is learning about Black inventors and others. I worked on a study recently talking about the impact of COVID-19 and distance learning on Black and Brown families. And one thing that was really poignant, or that stood out to me, was one of the teachers said that teachers have a lot of power and people don't necessarily realize it. Our education, our textbooks are not full of Black and Brown children, but teachers can make a difference. They can decide, I want to talk about George Washington Carver. I can decide I want to talk about Dr. King. I can decide I want to talk about all sorts of others who have accomplished a lot, and can also decide I want to pick a Black child to be in charge of this particular project. And so it really can make a difference. And so I just want all of us to be conscious of that. And also it's important, when your child does encounter racism, how you address it in order to prepare them, and how to make sure that they don't internalize it and assume it's their fault. I'll share, before I move on, a personal story. My son is one who was born in the era of Obama and kind of felt that this was a post-racial society. And then he ran one day at school. He had was in a school that was predominantly white, only 10% Black, and he was called the N-word by someone that he thought was a friend and a classmate. And because we had talked to him about some of these issues, instead of him internalizing it and thinking that something was wrong with him, his reaction was, well, I'm going to change things at this school. And he decided to run for student body president instead. He ran a very good campaign, and he won. And what he decided to do was partner with his principal about bringing in racial initiatives to talk about at school, so that children would feel empowered, even though they might be the minority at the school. So that's just sort of an example that I wanted to share. So thank you. Next slide. So thank you very much. I enjoyed my opportunity, and we will be taking questions for all of the presentations at the very end. Thank you.
So next, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to watch a quick video based on some of my work. It's a project that I've developed, which is in our curriculum for young people, called the 10 Rules of Survival If Stopped by the Police. We believe the 10 rules dramatically increase your likelihood of getting home safely, but as we all bear witness, there are no guarantees. You can start the video.
10 rules.
10 rules.
10 survival.
10 rules of survival if police. Number 1, be polite and respectful when by the police.
Be polite.
Be respectful. Remember that your goal is to get home safely.
Your goal is to get home safely.
Your goal is to get home safely. I'm sorry.
Number 2, if you feel your rights have been violated, you and your parents have a right to file a formal complaint with your local police jurisdiction.
Number 3, do not, under any circumstances, get in an argument with the police.
Number 4, always remember that anything you say or do can be used against you in court.
Number 5, keep your hands in plain sight.
Make sure the police can see your hands at all times.
Number 6, avoid physical contact with police officers. Do not make any sudden movements, and keep your hands out of your pockets.
Number 7,
Do
Do
not run, even if you are afraid. Number 8, even if you believe you are innocent, do not resist arrest.
Number 9, if you are arrested, do not make any statements about the incident until you are able to meet with a lawyer or public defender.
Number 10, stay calm and remain in control.
Watch your words. Watch your body language.
Watch your emotions. Remember,
Remember,
your goal is to get home safely.
get home safely. And
And so, ladies and gentlemen, our next presentation will be facilitated by Commissioner Giles Shipp. He is part of the New Jersey Police Training Commission and the president of the New Jersey chapter of Noble.
Good evening, and thank you for having me. Before I go through this portion of the presentation, I'd just like to put a disclaimer out there. I am not an attorney, and what I'm giving you is based on my over 30 years. Information I'm sharing with you is based on my over 30 years of law enforcement experience. I have served in a municipal police department and a patrol division for 17 years in Edison, New Jersey. I have also served 8 years in various different investigative bureaus and the New Jersey Attorney General's Office Division of Criminal Justice. And I've also served as a director of police for the city of Plainfield, New Jersey. And a culmination of that experience, in addition to my work in the police academy, I taught unarmed defensive tactics, use of force, and as well as patrol operation. So what I want to take this opportunity to do is to share with you a few tips that I would give you if you encounter a police. If it's in a motor vehicle stop, if it's in when you're walking down the street, or if they arrive at your residence for whatever reasons. First, let me say today's headlines are full of stories detailing encounters between law enforcement officials and young people. Unfortunately, some of these stories don't have a happy ending. While most officers in the law enforcement field have standard procedures to follow, most young people don't. As a result, there's often a breakdown in communication between law enforcement officials and young adults. So with Noble, and Noble is an acronym for the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. We've been in existence since 1976. We were formed during that period of time when crime was at an all-time high. The Joint Center for Political Studies, the Police Foundation, and the Department of Justice brought us together to figure out what can we do to address these community crime problems. Out of that gathering, which was a 3-day symposium in Washington, D.C., all 60 law enforcement leaders, African-American chiefs of police and deputy chiefs, decided that we need to meet like this on a regular basis. And after that meeting, our principles were to be the bridge between the community and the police. We also wanted to mentor other law enforcement officers to become chiefs of police. And we wanted to make sure that we reviewed all legislation, especially legislation that was directed at the African American community, and to make sure that justice was meted out fairly and equitably. So, saying that, I now want to go to what should you do when you're stopped by the police? And it's unfortunate that we have to give this talk as it's commonly known. I had to give it to my son, I had to give it to my daughter, but I wanted them to arrive home safely. The main premise, if we treated everyone like human beings, there would be no concern about civil rights, because Malcolm X has always said, if you have your human rights, you're going to automatically have your civil rights. But in those cases where that might not happen, I just want to take this opportunity to give you a couple of recommendations on what to do when you're stopped by the police. First and foremost, you should look for a convenient place to pull over as quickly and as safely as possible. Use your turn signal if you're pulling over, or if whatever your area you're going to. Remain calm and level-headed. Remember, any adverse action could be used against you. What do I mean by that? As it was said earlier in one of the videos, always be polite, courteous, and respectful. Even if you disagree with the officer's demeanor, even if you feel the officer has treated you unfairly, that forum is not the place to address those issues. Wait until you get home, or wait until you get into a courtroom, wait until you get to a police department, to an internal affairs division. Then you can air whatever grievances you may have, and try to remember what happened, what was the car's number, what was the officer's name, and all of that information is critical, and where you were stopped at. Also, turn off your engine, turn your radio down, place your hands in front of you if you decide to place them on the steering wheel, but place them in an area that will make the officer feel comfortable. Place those hands on your leg, and don't make any what's called furtive movements, any sudden movements. All right. If it's dark, turn on the interior light. An officer's job is tough, so you want to make them feel as comfortable as possible as well. Next slide, please. Roll down your windows, completely roll down the windows. And if you have tinted windows, roll all of the windows down in your vehicle. Do not speak first. Allow the officer to approach your car, and then he or she should introduce themselves and advise you as to providing, and tell you to provide them with credentials. And it's, in most states, it's a per se law. They do not have to tell you first what they were stopping you for. You have an obligation. Once you receive your license, you have an obligation to present to them your driver's license, your insurance card, and your registration. So don't get into a discussion with them, banter back and forth as to what did I do, why are you stopping me. Give them the credentials that they request. Again, be polite. However, do not volunteer any information. Keep your answers brief, because open-ended questions can get you into trouble. Remain calm. And sometimes it's a difficult situation, because you may feel like you have been treated unjustly or pulled over for no reason, but try to maintain your composure. By you exacerbating the situation, you can only make it worse on yourself. You can get additional summonses that you may have not gotten. And if you are careless in your movement and you bump into the officer, you can get arrested. And now you have a felony charge, a third-degree charge or higher, because now you committed a crime of aggravated assault. So try to stay calm, keep cool, let cooler heads prevail. When you're asked for your credentials, as I just stated, make sure that you let the officer know where you're reaching for your credentials, and produce those credentials, and move very slowly or gingerly to obtain that. And even if it's in your back wallet, advise the officer what you're doing and why you're making your respective movements. Next slide, please. If the officer gives you orders, follow the orders that the officer gives you, as long as it doesn't endanger your safety. Do not resist. Do not be rebellious. If the officer asks to search your vehicle, you do not have to allow the officer permission to search your vehicle. You can say no, but do not get into a confrontation with that officer. An officer would need a warrant to search your vehicle, but if they're insisting upon it, again, do not get into a confrontation with that officer. If you feel you were treated unfairly, as I said earlier, or stopped unnecessarily, do not argue the point at that time on that form. There will be a time after that you can air your grievances. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, deadly force. It is the standard that was set down by the U.S. Supreme Court that if an officer feels or reasonably believes that the moment that he or others are in imminent danger, it does not matter whether danger actually exists or not, the courts have given that officer the authority to use deadly force. All right, deadly force is an amount of force that is likely to cause either serious bodily injury or death to another person. Next slide, please. Fatalities at the hands of police. How many people have been killed by the police? The FBI records over the past decade show that approximately 400 police shootings a year, that there are 400 police shootings a year, an average of 1.1 deaths per day. According to the Pulse analysis, the daily death toll is 200 for 2015 was close to 2.6. At that pace, police would have shot and killed nearly 1,000 people by the end of the year. So as you can see, those numbers are high, and we have to work on different legislation and policies to make sure that that number comes down. How many innocent people have been killed by the police? 500 innocent Americans are murdered by police every year. Since 9/11, 5,000 innocent Americans have been killed by the police, equal to the number of U.S. soldiers, lost in Iraq. Next slide. We will be here for questions. I know there will be a lot of questions in and around interactions with law enforcement. So we look forward to addressing those questions at the end of all of the presentations. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to speaking with you.
Thank you, Commissioner Shipp. And now we also, ladies and gentlemen, want you guys to begin to think about your questions, because we will be coming to you shortly. Next, we'll have, what's up, brother? Attorney J. Wendell Gordon, the warrior lawyer.
Good evening, everybody. How's everybody? I can't hear you anyway. My name is J. Wendell Gordon, affectionately known as the Warrior Lawyer, and I'm a trial lawyer here in the great state of Maryland. Been practicing law for approximately 25 years, all up and down from Prince George's County to Baltimore City, all the way as far away as Cecil County, which is just on the border of Pennsylvania and almost Garrett County, which is the furthest tip west of Maryland. But I've been all over the state of Maryland, practiced all kinds of cases from a dime bag of weed to a death penalty. And that's the extent of my practice and experience. Is very wide ranging. I've handled all manner of high profile cases. And over the years, I've learned one very important thing as it comes to the topic about which we're discussing. Today, we live in a world where trained police officers can panic and act off impulse, while untrained civilians are required to stay calm with a gun in their face. And sadly enough, that is the reality that many of us face, myself included. I'm 51 years old today, but I still face the same challenges as an 18-year-old who walks in my shoes, because we have something in common, and that is that we are African Americans living in America. And so we have to protect ourselves. And unfortunately, my message is not one that is similar to going to, let's say, a massage parlor, because when I finish talking to you, you're not going to feel so good. I'm more like going to physical therapy. I'm going to stretch you in places where you've never been stretched before. So when you leave me on the first day, you're not going to feel so good. You're not going to feel like you went to a massage party. You're going to feel like you went to physical therapy, and those aches and pains, they're going to hurt even worse. But over time, they'll get better. And the reason why they get better, because you're going to have more information. You're going to know what you need to know to protect yourself. I'll start off by saying this. The days of officer friendly is over. You don't have that. We had it in our day, but you don't have that. And let me tell you something about myself. You know, the Civil Rights Act passed in 1964, okay? I was born in 1969. What does that mean? That means that I am a part of the first generation of free African Americans. You know how many years that's been? 54 years. Before the Civil Rights Act of 1954, we didn't have all the rights that everyone else had under the law. Now, just because it's on the books doesn't mean that it's being applied as it should, but we do have those rights and we do have remedies because of the 64 Civil Rights Act. So 54 years, we're talking about slavery on up through the post-slavery laws. They call them pig laws, or the black codes. We're talking about segregation. We're talking about Jim Crow. We're talking about all those things. The 64 Civil Rights Act, 54 years ago, your parents are probably 54 years old right now. They are the first generation of free African Americans in this state of Maryland that's recognized by law. So now here you are, 2 to 3 generations later, perhaps even more, perhaps even less. But the bottom line is you all are facing some of the same challenges that not I face, and although we do have that commonality, we have faced those challenges, but the challenges that my grandparents have faced and my parents have faced, because never before in my lifetime have I seen things as bad as they are today. So I'm gonna dispense with this officer-friendly thing. And what I say when I go on my talks is that you treat officers like you would a stray dog. You don't know if that dog's gonna bite you. You don't know if that dog's gonna lick your hand. If you have no business with that officer, I don't know if you necessarily should be running to that officer if you live in some of these communities or you frequent some of these communities where officers are not giving the community the respect that it deserves. Now, what do we do when we have situations such as this? Well, we all have one of these things right here. I'm using one and I got an old one in my hand. That's why it's a little dog-eared, you know, everything's kind of messed up. This is my old cell phone, okay? But I got a new one that I'm using to do this video. And so these cell phones are very important tools for our survival. Why do you say that? Of course, we know that the world has changed because of cell phones and that we see a lot of these things that we're talking about here tonight being recorded. And it's not that these things just started happening recently since the advent of the cell phone. It's just that we started recording these things more frequently because of the advent of the cell phone. And so the world gets to see what many of us, or a lot of us, see on a routine and daily basis. Now, police officers have all kinds of technology at their disposal, right? And you should too. And actually you do. This cell phone is all the technology that you need. And so whenever you're in a situation that even Commissioner Shipp just finished talking about, when you stop by police, okay, and you see the red and blue lights in your rear view mirror, before your car comes to a stop, practice using your cellular phone. Now, on your cellular phone, you have 2 recording devices. You have an audio recording device and you have a video recording device. Now, I'm not telling you to pull your phone out and put it in the officer's face when he comes up to you and say, officer, what do you want? What do you want? What you got me for? What do I do? You know, I'm not telling you to do that. But what I am saying to you, if you're uncomfortable with turning on the video portion of your cell phone, there's an audio recording device in your cell phone as well. Take that audio recording device, hit record on it, put it in the center console, put it on your dashboard, put it in your pocket, and it will record very well. And it will record that entire conversation. And why do you do that? For 2 purposes. Because a lot of times when you're under the stress of an officer either interrogating you or just by virtue of the stop, I know grown men who still receive high anxiety and get distressed when they're stopped by police. I'm talking about men older than myself. So it's perfectly normal to become distressed when you're stopped by police. You're not thinking of all the things you should do. I know they're saying 10 to 2 and turn off your engine. I mean, all these things are going through your head, okay? And sometimes officers may not have necessarily approached your car in the most respectful and friendly manner. So there might be a time where they're barking out commands in rapid succession. You need to really be prepared for anything that can happen. I think one of the best ways to prepare is if you're afraid to put your video on, put your phone on audio, set it down somewhere and just let that baby run. Let it run, let it run, let it run. Hopefully you can put it somewhere if you have on a suit or a suit jacket, which probably you don't because you're young people and not an old fogey like myself, but I'd have on a suit jacket or something. Let that thing run because you have the right to record the police in the performance of their public duties. Now, what does that mean? You can video record them or you can audio record them. So allow that audio recording to take place. Now, what does that do? It provides you with great evidence of the stop. You can bring the recording home, let your parents listen to it, and y'all can critique yourselves, see what you did wrong, what you did right. If something went wrong that evening, you have evidence that you can present to your lawyer like me, and let me decide how to use that evidence, okay? We can litigate over it, but we'll have this piece of evidence, whether we need to use it for impeachment purposes, that is to attack the credibility of the officer, or we use it as substantive evidence to say, look, this was a bad stop. You can tell by what's taking place in this stop that this stop should have never taken place. You can't pull somebody over because they have on a green jacket and you're looking for a yellow jacket, okay? You can't pull them over for that. So record. Police officers have all kinds of equipment in their car. They got computers in their car. You have one on your hip, so record. Now, in terms of stopping, when you're approached by the police, you don't have to necessarily talk to the police. You probably didn't know that. You have the right to walk away. And in the event that they've indicated to you that you are free to leave, then perhaps you should exercise that right. Remain silent. I don't care, for instance, if it's a car stop, you got your recording device on, you got 4 friends in the car or 3 friends in the car after your parents told you not to have more than 1 person in the car, you ride down the street with 4 people in your car, okay? And the police officer walks up to the car, he tells you what the problem is, but then he becomes interested in everybody else in the car that's lounging back in the seats, laying back where they can barely be seen. And he asked you to ask them to get out of the car, which he has the right to do. A police officer can order you out of a car, or a police officer can order you into a car. He can do it either way, however he feels comfortable. A lot of times when we get ourselves in trouble, we do everything right until the police officer says, well, I'm gonna need you to step out of the car. And you're like, for what, officer? This is a speeding ticket. Why do I need to step out of the car? I'm gonna need you to step. The police officer doesn't have to have a reason to order you out of the car. He can just say, step out of the car. You have to step out of the car and he knows that. And when he wants to elevate a situation, he'll tell you to step out of the car. It'll be some mundane or innocuous stop, such as a tag light out or something like that. He'll want you to step out of the car. And he knows that that's gonna get you, because like, why do I have to step out of the car? He'll say, I'm warning. If you don't step out of the car, I'm gonna pull you out of it. And they can. They can order you out of the car. It's a lawful command. You have to get out of the car. But other than that, you do not have to allow the police officers to search your vehicle. And even if you think that everything is okay in your vehicle, you got your 4 friends in the back of the car, these are my boys, or these are my girls, they wouldn't do anything that I'm not doing. I'm not into what they're into, and I know they wouldn't bring anything in my car. Well, you know what? They could have had some cocaine or a bag over 10 grams of marijuana, taken it out of their pocket, dropped it on the floor under the seat in your car. That your parents told you not to have people in, okay? And then you know who's going to get in trouble? Either all of them or just you, because you're responsible for everything within the interior of your car. So be aware of who you're riding with, who you're hanging out with. And I know your parents tell you all the time, you got to really watch who you're hanging out with, because if they're doing something, and you might have friends who smoke weed and you don't smoke weed. You might have friends who take e-pills and you don't take e-pills. You might have friends who are doing heroin or whatever it is, and you don't do any of those things. But these are your friends. You grew up with them. You played Little League with them, boys club, girls club, whatever. You grew up with these people, but you know that they're heading down the path that you're not heading down, and you're not into what they're into. But if you get stopped with these individuals in the car and they have some of this contraband, we call it contraband in the law. They have some of this contraband in their pockets and they take it out of their pockets and put it in your car because they're afraid to. They're looking back behind to see what's going on with this police officer. And it becomes yours. I just recently represented a young man attending Morehouse College, and he came to Baltimore. He's from Baltimore, attends Morehouse College, doing well in school, came to Baltimore, snuck into Baltimore where he was from because he just wanted to come up for the weekend and hang out with his friends back home who weren't going to Morehouse College and weren't doing much more than nothing else, okay? And they went to the park and they figured they were going to smoke a little weed. But you know what? One of his friends in the car with him, there was 4 of them. One of his friends had a gun in the car with him. Police come on the scene. The police officer gets nervous, orders everybody out of the car, okay? The guy gets out of the car, leaves his book bag in the car. The police officer looks in the book bag, he searches the car because he smells marijuana, and once they smell marijuana, that gives them probable cause to search the interior of the car. Still, even in Maryland, still, They can still search your car if they smell marijuana. And you could have smoked marijuana maybe a couple of hours ago. They can still search their car if they claim they smell marijuana in the car. Now, the laws recently changed in Maryland. If they smell marijuana on your person, they cannot necessarily search your person, but they can still search your car in the great state of Maryland, okay? So in this particular case, they searched one of the young man's book bag, and he had what? A gun. And you know what happened? All 4 of them got charged with the gun. Police officer said, whose gun it? My client, he didn't know whose gun it was. He didn't even know his boys were carrying guns, okay? All 4 of them got charged with guns, and they were smoking weed, and they found some weed in the car. So they have gun, and they have a gun, and they have weed in the car, which is contraband. That is just a bad combination to have to deal with at any point in time, much less in this point in time when you're coming home from school, when you shouldn't even been there in the first place, but you just wanted to hang out with some of your old friends from home. All 4 of them were charged, and because they had counsel such as myself and one of my frat brothers that I got to assist in the case, we got the charges dismissed, but we went through it. And if they weren't adequately represented, this case could have taken a turn for the worse and really messed them up for their future. So be mindful of the people who you're hanging out with. Be mindful that when you see the blue and red lights, now people are going to say, well, you shouldn't be fumbling around with a phone. Yes, you should, okay? You should practice it at home so that you aren't fumbling around with it. I shouldn't say you should be fumbling around with the phone, but you should practice hitting that audio record button when you're at home. So when these things occur, it'll become second nature. You just pop, 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 push it, let it run. And once you have that recording, you have at least the tools that you need to defend yourself. Now, and I'm gonna close this out now. Police officers can only stop you if they have reasonable articulable suspicion. So you need reasonable suspicion to stop. That is, they can stop you and ask you questions about any potential crimes. You need probable cause to search. Okay, reasonable suspicion to stop, probable cause to search. Reasonable suspicion to stop, probable cause to search. Now, reasonable suspicion is not probable cause. It's a different standard. You have to have a little bit more information to search. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
So thank you, Attorney Jay Wendell, for some solid advice and counsel. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be coming to Q&A in a few minutes, but we still have 2 remaining presentations on deck, but we really want you guys to begin to think about questions because we have a robust panel of experts who will be ready to answer any and all questions. And so really want you guys to be ready to post those questions, and we'll be able to have our expert panel be on deck to answer. And so our next presenter is Attorney Magruder, and she is on deck. She will be providing the next set of recommendations as well as ideas to address the issues at hand. And I am in error. She is the founder. I said that she was an attorney. She's the founder of Moms of Black Boys United. And so she will provide some very stimulating commentary as well as some ideas and strategies to help us address these issues that many of our young people face.
Thank you so much. And before I begin, I just have to ask you all, did you all hear that today a Black woman who is a Howard University alum and AKA was selected to be Joe Biden's VP pick? I just think we have to take a moment to acknowledge that wherever you fall on the political spectrum, whoever your selection was, I have my Howard University mug right here. I'm also an AKA, so I just had to shout out Kamala Harris before I say anything else and acknowledge the significance of that moment in history. So Mob United, I just want to give you a brief overview of who we are and how we came to be. I say I accidentally started an organization. I was not intending or setting out to start an organization, but in the summer of 2016, I had the moment that I think many people are having this summer in the wake of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, when there were 2 back-to-back killings of Black men within 24 hours of each other. If you remember the summer of 2016, we had Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge and Philando Castile in Minnesota, literally a day apart, and those images were flooding the news. They were very graphic, and it just messed up my psyche. And just to give you the shortest version of this story that I can tell you, I went on Facebook and made a post and started a private group, sending it to only 30 friends who I knew also had sons. I have 2 sons, and probably wanted a place to process this. And it just took off virally and grew to 21,000 that day, and now more than 170,000 moms of Black boys and men all over the world, in all states in the US. So the way we're structured is we have a 501c3, which is Moms of Black Boys United. And that organization is what I describe as the what we can do side of the equation. So we focus on providing information and support that helps navigate all the situations that our sons may find themselves in, and promotes positive images. Mondi talked about positive images, the importance of exposing our children to those positive images and narratives early on. So we focus on that as well. And then on the advocacy side, we have Mob United for Social Change, a 501c4, that focuses on influencing policy that impacts how we're treated and perceived by law enforcement and in society. So it's a combo of focusing on both policy and that very important perception, because what really got me, in addition to looking at those cases, is at the time, my sons were 7 and 4. They're now almost 12. My son's birthday is on Thursday, and 8. And I just read an article that I think was in Psychology Today or something like that, that said by the time a Black boy turns 10, people go from viewing him as innocent and worthy of love and cute to viewing him as a potential threat, to viewing them as someone who may harm you, who may be violent, to viewing them as someone who you should fear and avoid versus someone who is worthy of love and protection. And that just crushed my spirit. And I felt like, at the time my son was 7, I was like, I have 3 years to solve this problem, because that is just unacceptable. So if we can just go to the next slide. So Mob United for Social Change, our advocacy arm, we really focus on training moms on how to navigate systems and be effective advocates in all public forums. So when I say systems, we primarily focus on, well, we started out obviously because of police brutality, but quickly recognized we needed to expand beyond police brutality. So we focus on the education system, because we know our sons and daughters are being funneled through the school to prison pipeline and labeled very early and punished disproportionately for the same behaviors that other children have, and they are not punished for. So we had to focus on education. Also, of course, the criminal justice system. And we also realized quickly we need to focus on the mental health system, because that's often a factor in these cases. And I'll talk about that more in a few minutes. So we research and advocate for legislative change at all levels. Some examples are Raise the Age in New York, which raised the age of criminal liability for young people, bail reform, which started out in California and New York. Recently, after the Ahmaud Arbery case, we lobbied and pushed along with the NAACP in Georgia to get a hate crimes bill passed. Georgia was one of only 4 states that did not have a hate crimes bill on the books, which is just unbelievable. And we also partnered with a number of other social justice organizations in Louisiana in 2017 to get a whole package of criminal justice reform bills passed. In addition to that, we use this organization to speak out on current cases of discrimination and brutality and unwarranted use of deadly force. We have a rapid response process where we look at the facts of the case and see whether we think it's credible, whether we think it aligns with our mission. And sadly to say, I think as of this point, we started 4 years ago, we've spoken out and had calls to action on at least 75 cases since we started. And many of them are some you've heard of, but many of them are some that you haven't, because we don't just focus on the cases that make the news. We have moms all over the country who are in their communities surfacing things that are happening, because everybody doesn't have the cell phone video, everything doesn't make the news. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. As the attorney was saying, this has been happening for a long time. We just don't have all the tapes. So we speak out on those cases, and we also work with our 501c3 to provide outreach and support to grieving mothers. So we reach out to the mothers and find out, what do they need? Do they need help with the funeral? Do they need access to counseling services? There are a variety of things we've provided, even media training if they have to go on CNN and talk about it. How do you present yourself? We have moms with all kinds of expertise who are volunteering their time to serve in this capacity. Next slide. So I want to talk about the importance of legislation. And I'll go back to something that the representative from Noble said, and I just want to shout out Noble. We did a partnership with Noble, and we've now hosted probably more than 20 workshops in different cities around the country, and it's been a wonderful partnership. But he says something about deadly force and how it's justified if an officer, can reasonably say they fear for their lives. We've all heard it, you know, somebody had a cell phone in their hand or a wallet and they thought it was a gun, so they feared for their lives, and now your son is dead, and what can we do about it? Because it's justified, as he said, by the Supreme Court. So what I say to that is it's not justified and it's not justifiable. And if the law says that it is, then we have to change the law. So that's what we focus on. And I would say, I just want to highlight this one piece of legislation that was introduced by Karen Bass and Kamala Harris and Cory Booker, the Justice and Policing Act of 2020 in honor of George Floyd. And this is the most comprehensive piece of legislation that we've seen in the 4 years we've been in existence. A lot of pieces of legislation have had components of this, but this puts it all in one place. It focuses on training. So we think de-escalation training is very important, implicit bias training. The gentleman before me talked about how trained officers, you know, aren't expected to de-escalate, but we as citizens, and especially our teenage children, whose brains aren't even fully formed yet, like why should the burden be on them to be the ones to stay calm, don't move, be still, put your hands here? Their brains aren't even formed, and officers who are trained and have sworn to protect and serve can yell at them, can tell them to get on the ground, can yank them out of the car, and they're supposed to stay completely calm. And I just don't accept that as the reality we have to live in. So we focus on de-escalation training, implicit bias training, crisis intervention training, which is around mental health. Also the policy of it, like the Justice and Policing Act says that it would change from what's reasonable to what's necessary. So if deadly force is not necessary, that would no longer be okay if they kill someone. There would also be a duty to intervene from officers on the scene. We saw in the case of George Floyd in particular, I'm gonna cry just thinking about it. 3 officers are standing there watching this happen. No one intervened. That has to be a problem. So this requires them to intervene. It also limits the use of transfer of military weapons, bans chokeholds, no-knock warrants, creates a database, so many things. You can see the list, body cams. But the point is, just think about if all of these things have been in place as the law, how many cases could we have, you know, either not had or at least gotten closer to conviction on? You know, the law doesn't always work perfectly. You can have the law and it not be followed equitably, but you at least have to have the law on your side as a starting point. So I think that this is a great piece of legislation. It's made it through the House. It's not going to make it through the current Senate, but the fact that it at least exists is a great start. Next slide. So this is another thing I just want to highlight, the role of mental health. As I said, we started out with police brutality, quickly added education, school to prison pipeline, but then saw over and over again, in many of these cases, there's a mental health component. So in these cases, the standard procedures we've been talking about, just comply, doesn't work. If you're not in your right mind, you may not be able to comply. And this really is very personal for me because I have a son who has autism, who does not process language, does not process commands in the same way. So if some stranger walks up to him and tells him to get on the ground and put his hands up, the odds of him doing that are very slim. And I always say, I don't think his disability should be a death sentence. If he can't comply because of how he was born, that is not okay for you to tell me that the rule is just comply. So just to give you a few stats, 25 to 50% of police killings involve someone with a mental health disorder or who's currently experiencing a mental health crisis, up to half. So if these people are not able to just comply, how do we solve this? And this is why you hear a lot around the defund the police movement about not defunding the police. I don't really like the branding of it, but it's about reallocating resources to where they're needed in mental health and education and homelessness and workforce development. So, you know, Black males are 3 times more likely to be killed by police than white males, but people with mental health issues across race, across gender, are 16 times more likely to be killed by police. So we have to address this issue if we don't want to see more of these cases. And here I just list a number of cases that have happened, you know, since we started and before. You see both men and women have been affected by the mental health component of this. Next page. So what can we do? Call to action. That's why we're here, right? To be solutions oriented. We want to reach out, write our local, state, and national representatives. In Mob United, we make sure everybody knows who their city council person is, who their state representatives are. Meet your congressman, go to your local police precinct, know who the captain is, get to know them. Advocate for changes in gun laws, racial profiling, police reform, and whatever else you care about. Be an advocate. And we also want to raise awareness. So we want to have healthy debate both within and outside of our community. One of the unique things about our organization is that we're not just an organization of Black moms, we're moms of Black boys and men. So that means we're a multiracial organization. There are no requirements on education or age or anything like that. So we have quite a few moms in our group who are not Black, who either married a Black man and had a baby or adopted a Black son, you know, so we have these debates within our community and enables us to take it outside. It's 2020, serious election. We need to be present, we need to be visible at campaign events, show up and speak out. That's all I'll say about that. We have a legislative platform on our site that you can see what questions we want you to ask legislators and what issues we're advocating for, and ask them whether they have supported these types of bills. Last page. Also, continue voter registration drives. I know many of the young people are coming of age where you can vote. My 8-year-old wants to push for legislation to allow children to vote. He thinks he's ready. So he thinks anyone over 5 should be able to vote, and tried to start a petition at his school to say that last year. But if you're of age to vote, vote like your life depends on it, and get everyone else you know to do so. And just remember, young people have always changed the course of history. Think about Congressman John Lewis, who just passed away. He was very young when he went to meet Dr. Martin Luther King and said he wanted to be a part of the movement. It's always been in the hands of young people. So tell your children, if you're a parent, that you're the future. I'll say it to you because some of the young people in the call, you're the future, and we believe in your ability to change the world. The power is in your hands. You know, my 8-year-old, again, he has all kind of criticisms of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I don't say you're wrong. I say, you know what? We're doing the best we can with what we know, but I believe your generation will take it even further and have the answer. So empower them, give them the knowledge, and then trust that they're going to make a difference. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Powerful presentation. Last but not least, we'll have our final presentation, and then we'll go to Q&A. Up next, Dr. Kareem Salam.
Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone could hear me. I'm so delighted to be a part of this panel and to participate in this virtual forum. So I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I work in the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection, more commonly known as Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I work in a hospital there. I'm the medical director of an adolescent unit, and I'm on the faculty of Drexel University College of Medicine, a board certified child and adolescent psychiatrist. I'm also the father of a young adult child and an adolescent male. And the title of my presentation is Helping Our Children Cope, and more specifically, cope with the mental health issues that occur in the wake of these horrific traumas, namely the slaughter of African-American women and men, more specifically George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and many of the other martyrs, so many of them, so sadly, we can't name all of them. Next slide, please. So what's interesting about this slide is if you view the picture, it shows the flight attendant placing a mask on her face. And so those of us who've flown on an airplane, we're given this lesson that in the event the cabin depressurizes, that the mask should be placed on the adult's face and then the face of the child who's under their care. The thinking being the adult has to care for themselves first and put themselves in a position to save the youngster who's with them. This also applies to mental health and wellness. And mental health and wellness, these are things that cannot be done for you. You must do them for yourself, and they must be prioritized. So the children under our care, we model behaviors for them. And so how we respond in the wake of these tragedies is critically important. Children are easily influenced by their parents' reactions. Those of us who live in this world realize this world is awash in uncertainty. We are living in the setting of a global pandemic of COVID-19 and a global pandemic of racism and the negative impacts this has on people of color, both in this country and abroad. When you live in a world of uncertainty, any certainty injected in your life is greatly appreciated. Hence, the vital role of routines, habits, and schedules. These provide structure, which is important for the upbringing of a child. Now, when adults take care of themselves and they're facing these traumatic issues, this could become quite burdensome. And so if the burden of these traumas is low level, then you could consult those in your village who are worthy of your trust, whether they be close friends, family, relatives, or clergy. Now, in the event that the burdens that occur secondary to these traumatic events interfere with your ability to function, by all means, you should seek mental health support from a mental health professional, either a psychiatrist, a psychologist, or a therapist. Now, my favorite bullet point on this slide is bullet point number 6, pray, pray, pray. Because when we pray, we humble ourselves and we transfer our burdens to a creator that's far more powerful than we will ever be. And when we do that successfully, we create enough space intellectually, cognitively, emotionally, and physically to do the daily work of living. And prayer, it's a liberating force. Now, frequently prayer occurs within the framework of organized religion, but you could accomplish a similar goal through meditation that does not have that requirement. The beauty of prayer and meditation is that they are both portable. They could be done silently, they could be done aloud, they could be done any place, anytime. And it is critically important to respect your feelings. We're fortunately that in the village called Jack and Jill, we have many intelligent parents with resources. So don't delude yourselves. If you are feeling quite negative about events in the world, don't dismiss or discount those feelings. Next slide, please. Here we will discuss some of the warning signs of trauma, and the information is organized based on the age of the youngster. So for example, if you have someone who's in early childhood, less than the age of 5, they may engage in what are called regressive behaviors. So typically by age 5, children have mastered toilet training. They have, hopefully, they have abandoned such behaviors as thumb sucking. But in the setting of trauma and the emotional disequilibrium that occurs secondary to this, they could regress to these earlier stages of development. They could become very clingy, and they could require excessive amounts of reassurance. So if you move forward to latency age children, children who are about 6 to 12 years of age, they could also present in the wake of trauma with feelings of depression, anxiety, irritability, a low frustration tolerance, or somatic complaints like tummy aches, headaches. When people hear the term depression, they frequently think of sadness in the blues. However, depression in children and adolescents more commonly presents as anger and irritability. Hypervigilance is in the face of these traumatic events. Folks worry about their family members and they worry about their own safety, and they require excessive amounts of reassurance. And they are constantly checking on their parents and their loved ones, especially if there's an impending separation, whether the parent has to run to the grocery store and the child may become quite clingy and somewhat needy. Now, as children age and mature in their language abilities and their capacity to understand concepts becomes more sophisticated, they could engage in more worrisome behaviors in the wake of these traumatic events. So depression, sadness in the blues, suicidal thoughts, whether they are passive suicidal thoughts, I wish I were never born, I wish I could escape this world, or I wish I could simply go to sleep and never wake up, or active suicidal thoughts where they're thinking of imminently harming themselves. Suicidal thoughts or pronouncements should never be discounted, and they should always be investigated. There are many times they are simply a cry for help, but this is an opportunity where intervention is warranted because the stakes are simply too high if you miss. Moreover, adolescents have the freedom, sadly, to engage in high-risk behaviors like the use of illicit substances. The attorney spoke earlier of the young man from Morehouse College who ventured home to Baltimore and decided to spend time with his buddies smoking weed and getting into other things. And so we have to be mindful of the things that we keep in our home, like nicotine products, alcohol, or illicit substances that kids could use to disinhibit themselves, impair their set of brakes, which typically grants them appropriate judgment. When you take these away under the influence of substances, you could have a tragic outcome. A set of disturbances that are more common amongst young women are disordered eating, whether it be consuming too many calories in a short period of time or binge eating. And to avoid weight gain in the wake of binge eating, there's self-induced vomiting, also known as purging. Or you could restrict calories and not eat enough and begin to lose weight. These eating related behaviors are critically important, and they could worsen in the setting of stress. Finally, you could view an adolescent's ability to function. So if an adolescent is a high achiever or they've excelled extracurricularly and they suddenly lose an interest or their ability in these certain realms, you should also be on the lookout. There might be a problem. Next slide, please. Media exposure. This is a very important slide because many of our young people are walking around with the smartphones, as the attorney mentioned earlier. And these smartphones, these technological devices, they're absolute marvels. They afford kids access to more information than what's available in the Library of Congress. So we really have to be mindful of our young people's access to information. And the younger they are, restrictions should be set in place, whether they be technological filters to eliminate negative news information and control the amount of information that's coming into their news feeds. Also, many of us live in homes where we have cable television and we have these 24-hour news channels. And if you're politically engaged and you're listening to these news programs, they typically have features that include breaking news, where they mention these traumas and they have these videos playing in a loop. And this could be quite alarming. As I believe Mrs. Magruder mentioned, she talked about children having underdeveloped brains, and there's scientific literature that says that brain development is not complete until the early to mid-20s. And so you have young people viewing these videos on a loop and they don't fully understand these events, and they can cause tremendous anxiety. So we need to control the amount of information that is being broadcast into our homes through cable television. For example, the video, I refer to it as 8:46, 8 minutes and 46 seconds, when we witnessed the life being taken away from George Floyd. I'm almost 50 years old and I viewed that video once. I don't need to view it again. And young children certainly don't need to view that video. That video grabbed me, it held me, and it refused to let me go. And so again, we ought to be extraordinarily mindful of what our young people are consuming in the way of media. The older our children are, we should have conversations with them, ask them about what they've heard and what they've seen, and we should use open-ended questions, and we should do as much listening as talking when we engage them about these materials. We should take their ideas seriously, and we should not be dismissive of their feelings and their concerns. Next slide, please. The conversation. So find out what concerns your child. Again, open-ended questions. And when you're listening to what they have to say, sometimes you realize that they're getting information from their friends, and many times this information is awash in inaccuracies. So you could take advantage of the opportunity to correct some of that misinformation. And when discussing these issues, you don't need to review the grisly details of some of these horrific traumas, as that can be traumatic in and of itself. The youth in Jack and Jill are very fortunate, as many of them belong to a village that is quite supportive, and that includes adult advocates who love them, nurture them, and support them. So sometimes our children feel more comfortable talking to other adults who may not live in their home to express some of these feelings. So we should allow that. We should also reassure them. I believe one of the earlier presenters said you could do everything possible to try to keep yourself safe, but there are no guarantees. But the one guarantee you could offer these youth is that your love and your care and concern for them is boundless and it knows no ends, and you will do everything possible to keep them safe in all aspects of their lives. There are times with these horrific traumas, they can have a powerfully negative effect on us, and they could tap into emotions that some of us have sequestered years ago. I know the George Floyd video absolutely brought me to tears. And so we have to acknowledge the power of these emotions. And again, they should never be discounted, and folks should be encouraged to have conversations and express themselves. Now, there are some children vary in their capacity to express themselves verbally. And there's some kids who are more creative or artistic or musically inclined, and they express themselves better through laying beats or writing rhymes or playing their instrument or writing poetry or prose. So whatever media is more comfortable for them, that is the media that they should employ to really assist them in processing these issues. And we should never discount what they're saying. It's critically important to listen to them and to respond. Next slide, please. The safe space is home and family. We have private conversations in the home that we typically don't have outside the home. This is a space where judgment should be reserved. And we share living space with the people who love us. And oftentimes these are the people who have given us life. So in this environment, we play and we relax and we let our hair down. And this is very important when we live in a world awash in uncertainty. So the appropriate physical expression of love and support, whether it be hugging and cuddling, these are things that are done within a family system. And given the climate in which we find ourselves with these twin pandemics, it is important that our young people feel supported. Again, I mentioned earlier that structure and schedules are very important, and not just for serious activities, but for family activities, entertaining activities, whether it be sharing a movie, watching a video, playing a board game, just spending time together, catching up, and just exchanging thoughts and ideas in a warm environment with family. That's very, very important. Next slide, please. This is a list of resources that I found quite useful for guiding parents and caregivers in having these conversations about racial and social injustice in the wake of these horrific tragedies. And I'd like to highlight the list that was curated by the Oakland Public Library. It was organized by the age of the child, and these resources were so helpful, and they're merely a few clicks away on a keyboard. These are easily accessed through Google. Dr. Howard Stevenson is an African-American psychiatrist at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education. And there's a publication called the GSE Newsroom, where he had a very insightful interview about having these conversations with young people. So by all means, I encourage you to follow up on these and other resources to assist you in having these very challenging conversations with the young people in your life. Next slide, please. Again, thank you so much for allowing me to share time with you. And I'd like to mention that I belong to an organization called Global Health Psychiatry. We were founded by 10 African-American psychiatrists sprinkled about the country, literally from sea to shining sea. And we publish mental health literature for the African-American community, and we are focused on lay people. Our first book was Mind Matters, a resource guide to psychiatry for Black communities, written in question and answer format. And our avatar was an African-American grandmother. And our sophomore effort was How Amari Learned to Love School Again, a story about ADHD. So this is a company that we formed, and we're committed to attacking stigma as it applies to mental health in the Black community. And we want to meet the people where they are by providing this appropriate mental health literature. And again, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Kareem. Ladies and gentlemen, we have about 10 minutes remaining for questions. So we really want you guys to send us your questions. You heard a series of dynamic, thought-provoking presentations. And so we are super interested in getting your questions and allowing our expert panel to respond. And so please post your questions in the feed and we will respond appropriately. And so keep in mind, you can't ask 35 questions. So one question per person, and please begin to post your questions. And so we have a question: is it appropriate to request that an officer turn his or her body camera on? And so let's go to Jay Wendell for that.
It's very appropriate. It's very appropriate. In fact, you should ask the officer to turn on his or her body camera, especially in today's day. Sometimes, I always say the best disinfectant is sunlight, and in criminal justice, in the criminal justice system, the best disinfectant is have some type of recording of the encounter. So yes, by all means, if an officer either forgets or just doesn't think to turn on his body camera, you should request him to do so.
Great question. Any other panelists want to respond to that?
Yes, so let me just add something to that too. That is determined by the particular police department, the policy of that police department. And if not, depending upon which jurisdiction you're in, it might be a directive from the attorney general, the prosecutor, or the DA. But what you should do is you should be engaged with your police department. So that can be a simple question of calling down and asking the chief or the chief executive of that particular agency, sheriff or whatever the case may be, what is your policy on that? But I'm going to even take it a step further. You know, you need to be engaged with your agency. So when those policies are being developed, you will have that African-American community will have representation at that table. And that is the best way. So when that occurs, you will already know beforehand. Unfortunately, we tend to become reactive instead of proactive. But hopefully, in light of the world we're living in now, more people will engage their law enforcement agencies because we police at the consent of the people.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, definitely, Commissioner.
Let me just pick up on that. Turn on those audio recordings, like I said earlier. Also, like when you're talking about being proactive, proactively turn on those audio or video recordings. That way you won't have to rely solely on the officer and his body cam. But again, I stand by what I said. Request that the officer turn on his body cam.
Okay, thank you. Next question. How should organizations like Jack and Jill, with such a massive membership, financial support, and spending power, be leading this movement? How can Jack and Jill position themselves as an organization to be a leader in this movement?
Well, considering that Jack and Jill is the premier organization for African-American families, that's a fantastic question. And there certainly are things that I think that we can do to increase our legislative advocacy as an organization. I think that we should have a seat at the table in actually drafting legislation and working with our legislators. I think that we could do, make sure that we're at the rallies, make sure we're actually organizing some of them as well, and have regular meetings with our legislators. I also think that we could have maybe scorecards and things like that for legislators too, even though Jack and Jill does not endorse candidates. You talk about particular issues. So where are you on juvenile justice issues? Where are you on racial profiling? Where are you on gun control? Where are you on racial profiling? And so considering that we have 11,000 members representing approximately 40,000 family members, I think we're certainly very well suited to do something like that. I don't know if some of my other colleagues in the organization want to comment as well.
Well, let's go to the next question, because ladies and gentlemen, we only have about 4 minutes. This is a great question. This particular person is a new driver, and with all that's been happening, particularly around police stops, any recommendations around helping them deal with their own anxiety when they actually, and I know we've all dealt with that anxiety when a police officer pulls up behind you. And so recommendations for dealing with anxiety as a new driver as it relates to the police.
Well, I'll just mention, I was going to leave it to brother psychiatrist, but because even I deal with anxiety when I see the lights come up behind me. I mean, that's a human phenomenon. And so just try to stay as calm as possible, you know, and try to keep your composure. That's about the best I could say. And, you know, as I said, and as the attorney said earlier, you know, be cooperative, but also protect yourself and make sure that, you know, you don't give out any information that could be damaging to you later.
And really quickly, I'd like to add a few things. Drive slowly, pull over if you're required to do so, if the lights are flashing. If you're being followed, just adhere to the speed limit, remain calm, deep cleansing breaths. If you have structured prayers that you say, you could say those silently. And I find that the greatest anxiety is once you've pulled over and you're awaiting the approach of the officer. So that's the power of prayer is that it could center you and calm you. And the affect, the outward expression of emotion versus mood, which is the verbal report of emotion, the affect is very important. So if you've calmed yourself, if you've centered yourself, you're in a better position to comply. And to quote Eric Adams, he's a brother from Brooklyn. He's the borough president of Brooklyn, and he was a police officer prior to that. So he literally said there were days in his career where he was wearing his uniform, and then after his shift, he was at a protest against police. And so he advocated you comply, you don't litigate the issues with the police officer in the moment because your goal is to get home safely. And in order to successfully litigate anything, you need to have a pulse. And so, you know, the power of prayer, meditation, to center yourself as you await the encounter, and to give yourself the presence of mind to access your smartphone or your recording device. And by all means, when you reach for that device, really be very, very careful. Be extremely careful. And if you've not practiced this, then, you know, I'm a believer in practice leads to perfection. So if you've not perfected it, you're really taking an extraordinary risk. And I'm very risk averse when it comes to the safety, welfare, and lives of other people's children.
Thank you, Doc. Last question, ladies and gentlemen. We got about 45 seconds. Based on everything that is happening, if you were pulled over by an officer, he pulls his gun out, you're nervous, you're upset, he doesn't have a warrant, but by virtue of the fact that the officer has pulled out the gun, what should you do? Should you comply and let them search the car? And we have about 30 seconds.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, yeah. If you're looking at the barrel of the gun, I would advise you just to comply, as the doctor said just before us. We can deal with the aftermath later. Right now, we need to get you home, and to get you through that through that encounter as safely as possible.
Okay.
I would, you know, every situation is different. You know, you could be stopped at 11 o'clock at night on a dark highway, and an officer may pull out his gun until he can see you and see who you are and what you are. So every situation is different. You know when you're in that tight spot of a situation, but you also know sometimes, you know, that complying means, yeah, do what the officer tells you to do. But if the officer says, I want to search your car, you can just interject no. And if he searches, let him, you know, you can't stop him. I don't by any means say, you know, try to stop him. But once you express your opinion on it, that's it. That's all you have to do. Leave the rest to us. We'll take it from there.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, if we are out of time. I know we could go for another 4 hours, but we want to be respectful of. I see Doc has his hand up.
I quickly, this last comment saddens me, but I want to comment on it. It says, based on everything that is happening from the backlash of the Black Lives Matter movement, how can I continue to feel confident in my own skin? And my response to that is a quote from my hero, Muhammad Ali. And he said, if you don't think you're the greatest, you better pretend. That's my response to that.
And I'm sorry, I saw that tweet. It made me sad. So I just want to add something to it. You know, you just have to remember that we come from a long line of survivors. It's only been 155 years since the end of slavery, making it illegal. It's only been 55 years since the end of segregation. And the fact that we as a people have achieved as much as we have, not just survived, but thrived. The fact that we've had a Black president, and now we may possibly have a Black vice president, and we've excelled across, look at all the fields represented here, you know, psychiatry, law enforcement, education, and beyond. The fact that we have made as much progress as we have, with people constantly having their foot on our neck, is something to be proud of. So you have every reason to be confident in your own skin, because you come from a long line of survivors and people who have made it in spite of. And we know that you all will continue to do the same.
Gabrielle, I just wanted to add that you're the reason, or one of the reasons, that we decided to have this virtual forum in the first place, so that you would know that you are not alone, that there are many people across this country who have struggled with these issues and who have been concerned about the deaths of unarmed African Americans. And in the midst of a pandemic too, where people can't even necessarily get a chance to see each other and hug each other and commune that way. But even through a virtual forum, it's an opportunity for you to be able to answer these questions and know that there are many others who care about them, and that you should be 100% confident in your Black skin. Absolutely. It's a blessing, and nothing that anyone else says or does can ever take that away from you.
And I would also like to say that we as African Americans, we're undefeated, okay? We've come from slavery, and I've already talked about it, but give us a 400-year head start and find out where we would be, okay? But you've had a 400-year head start, and here we are, your president, your vice president, your doctors, your lawyers, your architects, we're all of it. We are undefeated. There's never been anything that has occurred to us in our past. We may lose some battles, but we always win the war. There's never been anything that can come before us that we have not surmounted and achieved, actually overachieved. So remember that as an African American today, you are undefeated in every field of human endeavor.
Well, okay. I want to thank our expert panelists. I want to thank the young people and parents who were eagerly listening and posting questions. One of the things that I hope that as we do this again, that we can make it a little bit more interactive, and maybe take questions earlier so we can really field more questions from the young people who I know are dealing with a lot of these issues on a regular basis, and trying to make some sense out of all of the things that we're talking about this evening. And so you guys be safe, continue to wear your masks, be ever vigilant about paying attention to your surroundings, because we're still dealing with COVID-19 and unbelievable losses of life. And so we want folks to be safe. And to the adults, we got some work to do. And so it's really important that we are able to partner with organizations across the country to really get this work done. And so you guys be safe, and let's continue to make good decisions and work on behalf of our children and families.